Hey folks, Paul Abernathy here. Thanks for joining me today on this video. I was asked by many of our students to do a video specifically on service bonding, very specific to Article 250, 90, and 92 sections. And I figured, you know what, if the students ask for me to do some training on that, then I'll most certainly do that for them. So in today's little video, we're going to go over the basics of 250.90 and 250.92. We're going to focus on service bonding. And again, they ask a lot of questions in an email. So I want to make sure that I cover all of their questions as we go through it so that they understand the concepts and what we're trying to do. Okay, so let's go on and just get into it. So here we're at 250.90. And of course, we have the National Electrical Code if we need it. That we can go look at as well. But what are we talking about? 250.90, the requirements is bonding is required to be provided if necessary to ensure electrical continuity and the capacity to conduct safely any fault current likely to be imposed. Well, it's the reason we use metal boxes. We bond the metal boxes. In this case, we're using a metal nipple to bond to this box. It's all bonded together so that any fault that would happen here is going to be carried through to this side. So it all acts as one. They're all bonded together, okay? So the bonding really connects all the metal parts, enclosures, raceways, and all together. And it also extends that connection to the earth. Bonding is fundamental that we understand the concepts of it. And so when it comes to services, we have to do a little something extra, a little bit more than normal. As you see in this image here, I will tell you that this is just basically for bonding because this could not be used in a service application because you cannot use these standard lock nuts. But we'll talk about that as we get into the requirements for it. Article 100 defines bonding as a conductor that ensures the required electrical conductivity between metal parts that are required to be electrically connected. Granted, you look at this image here and you see all these raceways. This is one way to do it. There are many methods that you can use to bond components together. This just happens to be one way to do it. You see they have one bonding jumper and it's simply looping through all of these connectors that are connecting to these clamps that are connecting to each one of these raceways. So there are many ways to do it. We're going to talk about today some of the concepts of service bonding and what we can do. So we're going to look at 250.92a, and this is bonding at your service. So all of us know what the service is. And if you're at a house, for example, or a dwelling, that is where your main service disconnect is. That is where you're going to have your main bonding jumper at. That's typically where your grounding electrode conductor going down to the grounding electrode is going to be, even though the code does allow it anywhere on the supply side up to and including the point of attachment. But you have all these little elements. We're talking about bonding the service, bonding the raceways between the weatherhead down to the meter enclosure, from the meter enclosure to the emergency disconnect, from the emergency disconnect to the service disconnect, or maybe the emergency disconnect outside is also the service disconnect in accordance with 230.85. We're going to talk about all that bonding and what the code allows, that little extra that you have to do. Granted, if you any point you're confused about grounding and bonding, I will encourage you to check out our website because we have a great course on grounding and bonding. And I think that whether you're studying for an electrical exam or you just want to get better at understanding National Electrical Code or just grounding and bonding in general, we have without a doubt, I believe, the best program when it comes to grounding and bonding. And I also encourage you to listen to our new podcast called The Bond and Ground. And so that is a new podcast that we're going to be digging into all types of topics that are involved with bonding and grounding. So I encourage you to listen to that. It's available on all of your favorite listening platforms, Spreaker, Spotify, Deezer, all those type of platforms. So I encourage you to go listen to that. All right, so let's look at the requirements here for bonding at the service. So A, these are the general requirements. It says the normally non-current carrying metal parts of equipment indicated in the following shall be bonded together. Okay, so 250.92A1, it says all raceway cable trays, cable bus framework, auxiliary gutters, or service cable armor or sheathing that encloses, contains, or support service conductors, except as permitted in 250.80. Well, 250.80 is more addressing things like isolated elbows that are below 18 inches. Okay, so in general, all raceways, cable trays, gutters, any service cables, anything that contains, encloses, or supports service conductors are required to be bonded. Now, it also goes on to say that all enclosures containing service conductors, including meter fittings or meter enclosures, boxes, or the like, interposed in the service raceway or armor. So interposed, for those that are unfamiliar with the terminology, interposed just basically means introduced into the actual run. So I could have a weatherhead that comes down to a meter. That meter is interposed into those service conductors as it continues past the meter into your either emergency disconnect or could be your service disconnect, or it could be both. So if you think about that concept, interposed means it's just putting something in the way. It's being added into the circuit, okay? And we're talking about service conductors, okay? Also, it would be the right time to us to remind you that 250.142a has an allowance that says, you know what, on the service supply side, okay, and that is from your service disconnect up to the point of attachment, all of that is service conductors. All of that, I could bond those metal components using the grounded neutral conductor. And that's the allowance you get in 250.142a. Now, people sometimes will see that and say, well, you telling me that I can actually use the neutral to bond a wireway or bond a raceway or bond something or bond the meter enclosure on the supply side? And the answer is yes, you can use that under 250.142a. Now, we can't do that on the load side. Doing so would violate 250.24a5 or 250.24b, depending on which code cycle you're in. That is where we would make an improper case to neutral connection downstream of the service disconnect, and that is not permitted. Okay. Now, there are some allowances for detached structures based prior to 1995. That's not what we're talking about today. New construction, new applications. So again, 4 conductors, separate grounds and neutrals, same concept. We cannot use the neutral downstream. We can use the neutral on the supply side to bond metal parts and metal components. So looking at this layout here, bonding of the service, 250.92a, it says conductors on the line or supply side of the service disconnecting means are not provided with overcurrent protection. So properly bonded and grounding surrounding enclosures is essential. Now there is some fuse protection likely on the primary side of this separately derived system, in this case the utility transformer, but we don't have any control over that. We can't see it. We don't know what size it is. We can only hope that in the process here, that if something ground faults here, that it may trip something upstream. But we as electricians can't control that. All we can do is make sure that we bond all these metal parts together. They're all at the same potential, and we do what the code allows us to do. That's all we can really do at this point, okay? So if you see right here in this illustration, and of course I can blow this illustration up slightly and show you here, here's the connection. So this is a grounded system. Here is from the XO to here to Earth. That is your grounded system. Comes down with a grounded conductor, comes down through this meter. Now this meter is likely bonded right here with the neutral being bonded to this enclosure. Of course, this raceway coming down is bonded based on this hub right here, okay? And assuming based on the way this looks right here, this is probably a punched hole. So everything's punched through. Let's see, it comes down here, and here we have a, looks like some type of hub that comes in. So that's going to connect this raceway to this hub. This is going to be connected to this enclosure, right? This enclosure is connected to the grounded neutral conductor right here, okay? And then you see it coming into the service equipment. So this service equipment coming in right here, you see on this side right here, this may be, let's say this is an impairment. Let's say this is a concentric or eccentric or eccentric knockout. If that's the case, then you have to have a bonding jumper on it. Okay. So anyway, we're going to look at all that, but that's just kind of a basic layout of what you got going on here, trying to show you how everything is connected together. All right, so we're required to tie all those things together, all those enclosures, all those raceways, everything that contains service conductors, meter enclosures, tie everything so they're all bonded together properly. Now we're going to learn the methods of how to do that. What are we going to need to do in order to make sure that takes place? Okay, well, let's kind of break it down. And what we've done is we've taken 250.92b and broke it into pieces. So it's a little easier for us to understand. Now, the first requirement, it says bonding jumpers meeting the requirements of this article are required to be used around impaired connections, such as reducing washers or oversized concentric or eccentric knockouts. Okay, or eccentric knockouts, however you want to say it. I've heard it said both ways. One of the things to remember here is that if you encounter any type of impairment at all, whether it's reducing washers, whether it's knockouts, whether it's concentric or eccentric or eccentric, or however you want to say it, no matter what you encounter, they are an impairment. And because they're an impairment, you're going to always have a bonding jumper. Now, there have been many ways for us to do this. We'll talk about what happens if I remove all the impairments. What if I remove all of the knockouts? What can I do? Well, you can do things like bonding lock nut. You could do a bonding bushing. Again, provided you have a mechanical means, you can do certain things. But I think what's important for us to realize is this is one of the questions that folks ask me. They go, when am I required to have a bonding jumper? And I'm doing service side bonding. You're going to be required to have a bonding jumper anytime you encounter some type of impairment, right? Then you're going to require that to be a bonding jumper to take place. Now, going back to the information here, it's talking about standard lock nuts or bushings are not permitted to be used only as the only means for bonding required by this section, but are permitted to be installed to make a mechanical connection of the raceway. So this one's important because you're going to see in a minute of the different types of things that we can do. And at no point is a standard lock nut acceptable. Now, there are bonding lock nuts. We'll see an image of those later. But standard lock nuts are not acceptable. Now, you can buy let's say they're doing a situation where it's still service, it's indoors, and we have a piece of VMT and it's a set screw connector. Okay. Well, that set screw connector goes in, the threads go into the KO, and typically they would have a lock nut. Well, that is not going to work for service bonding. We cannot use a standard lock nut. Now, we could use it for the mechanical part, but we cannot use a standard lock nut in order to meet that bonding requirement. Okay, it's not just the connector fitting, but also in conjunction with the lock nut. You cannot use a standard lock nut for that. Right? And you're going to see later when it talks about threadless connectors and threadless couplings and all that, you see that we're talking about just the interconnecting of the raceways and connecting from the raceways to a connector. We're not talking about the threads. Okay, so that was a question that we did at coffee hour, and one of the students asked me, and I wanted to make it real clear. In no point do standard lock nuts allow to do any of this type of stuff. Okay, all right. Next, it says electrical continuity at service equipment, service raceways, and service conductor enclosures must be ensured by one or more of the methods described in 250.92 B1 through B2. Okay, one of the methods we have to do to make sure that we do that little extra insured bonding, a little extra something that's got to be done to this. Okay, so this is an example here of just showing you an impairment and things like this. Okay, so if you're encountering any type of impairment, whether it's reducing washers, again, oversized washers, whether you're dealing with concentric, eccentric, or eccentric, however you say it, no matter what you're dealing with, if there's some type of impairment involved, you're going to have a bonding jumper. Now, if you can remove all of the rings, if you remove all of the KOs, then you can use other options, because now you're not encountering those. Then you can use like a bonding wedge. You can use a bonding bushing. You could use a bonding lock nut. You have other options, but that's only when you're not encountering these impairments to the connection. Okay. So if we're looking at this scenario right here, this is B1. Now, B1 in the code says, you know what? Remember what I said earlier about 250.142a, where it says you could use the grounded conductor to bond on the supply side? This is essentially saying the same thing. It's basically, B1 is saying, you know what? I'll let you use the grounded conductor to bond the components on the supply side. So if we look at this illustration here, and I can blow this up, just to kind of look at it right here, these are your service disconnects. This is a CT. These are your service laterals coming in, okay? And you see that this right here is the neutral. It's bonding to this enclosure. And these raceways, if they're metal, coming in, have to be, and we're assuming, since these look like set screws, right? And you can't use standard lock nuts, all right, on this scenario. So it needs something, so they're choosing to use a bonding jumper right here. So this is a supply side bonding jumper, by the way, size based on the size of the conductors in this raceway, in 250.102c, which we'll talk about in future episodes. But the point is, you see that this enclosure here is connected to the neutral here. This is permitted, right? This is permitted in 250.142, and it's directly referenced in 250.92b1. And so you see it's done here. Okay? They didn't do a little call out from here down to here, but the same thing's being done right here. Not an issue. All right, now, this enclosure here, this wireway right here, you see that it is being connected to this enclosure, right? Right here, because this enclosure is directly connected to the neutral conductor. So here, they're doing a jumper here to connect this one to this one. These two are being connected together. So now this one's bonded. These raceways are bonded. Now this enclosure is bonded. So the enclosure is bonded, okay? Now, again, we're just trying to show you the neutral connections. So if you go down here, this is your service equipment, okay? This raceway right here contains service conductors. This raceway is bonded. This raceway right here contains service conductors. You see that this raceway is bonded right here through a supply side bonding jumper, but it is connected to what? The neutral conductor right here. And this is connected over to here. So this is your main bonding jumper right here. It's just shown of a wire type rather than all on one bus. Sometimes we do this so you can break it out and have this as an opportunity to explain how to size these various things. So this image is just trying to show you the relationship to using the neutral to bond all these things up to including the service disconnecting means. That's all this illustration is trying to purvey, okay? Now, same deal, we're still on B1. What about a remote meter? Somewhere upstream. Okay, well, maybe you don't want the meter on the side of the building. Maybe it's remote. All right, so you've got an overhead coming in. It's going down through your meter. Then it's leaving and going up and going over to the building. Again, all of this here is being bonded through what? It's all being bonded through connection to neutral conductor. The typical meter that you would get for a residential application is the neutral connection is going to be bonded to the enclosure. Make sure you validate that. Again, it should take place in most all meter enclosures you encounter, but there are some examples of tenant side meters that may not. So again, need to be careful, but if you're just using standard meter, then all of this is bonded to the neutral and it's not going to be a problem with that scenario. This one is actually done through a hub right here, right? And over here, we can't see what the nature is being done, but all of this is connected and all this is bonded together, okay? Same thing, whether or not we're doing it with a CT. It's no different whether it's a remote application here or we're doing a remote CT. I'll zoom in on this a little bit for you. So here we've got the conductors coming in and then we got the conductors going out, okay? Just going through this CT right? So here's the CT. Let me go down a little bit for you. So here's the CT enclosure. You see right here, we're utilizing the allowance in 250.92b1, which again is also referenced in 250.142a. We're using the neutral to bond this enclosure. Okay? So that's all being bonded together. Okay. All right. Now, bonding metal raceways to metal current transformers down here. Okay. Depending on the type of connection right here. If these were, down here, then these raceways to these fittings that are connected here, if they're impaired, then you have to do something extra, okay? If these just look like regular old bushings on here, so this tells me that these are punched holes and they're maybe using something like a bonding lock nut down here, this application, okay? And you wonder about over here, this is not containing service conductors, okay? We're talking about service conductor applications right now. But what's more important is that you see right here that this enclosure is bonded to the neutral, okay, in this application. All right, moving on to B2. So real quick, showing you what's in the code. We just went over these general rules and we just looked at B1. This is the one right here that's talking about using the grounded service conductor. And then you got a B2, a B3, and a B4. Now, B2 is connections that are made up wrench tight. So you have to physically tighten them up with a wrench, channel locks, whatnot, in order to tighten it up in a couple turns, and that's going to become very tight due to those tapered threads, right? So it's going to threaded entries, hubs and enclosures, all those type of things. So if you think about it, you're going to wrench tight these connections. You're going to be screwing them into hubs on the top of meters. They're threaded entry, threads right down into it. Okay. Don't need any bonding jumper there. It wouldn't be necessary. It's the way it's made. Usually they have 4 screws down to the cabinet, and then it have a threaded hub entry, that type of thing. So you screw it into it. They also make these fittings that there's a brand called Myers Hub. It's just a brand name. But there are certain types of fittings that you can bring into it, and it will actually screw in just instead of a fixed hub. It is a hub that is, again, Myers Hub is a very popular brand. That they have some that are rated for grounding and bonding applications in wet locations, and some that are not. So be careful which one you buy. You make sure you get the right one for your application. And if you also look at how they connect with that fitting, it has serrations, and it will actually bite into the actual cabinet. But those are specifically listed for that application. Okay, so they're like a Myers Hub is one of the brands. Okay, they're not all Myers Hubs, but that's just one brand that is very popular. And it allows you to, it's basically like a robust connector. It's not like a hub that would bolt with 4 screws on the top of a meter. It is basically looks like a connector, but is a little more robust, and it's been evaluated for the applications that's being used for. Now, made wrench tight involves properly using the proper size pipe wrenches, proper tools, tightening it down. There is no torque value on that. Don't give anybody any ideas. There's no code involved in that. You just use good workmanship. You're tightening it down till it's tight, and it'll get tight fairly quickly because of the way the threads go into those hubs. Okay. The threaded connections must be electrically secure, as they will carry ground fault current. And again, there is a hope that there is some type of protection. Even if it's on the primary side, it is some type of protection upstream that maybe will kick in. But as far as we're concerned, we're just constructing it following these rules. Again, these are the prescriptive requirements to meet the performance requirements in 250.4. We're now doing the prescriptive requirements to meet the intentions of performance in 250.4. All right, so here you really can't see, but this is just showing you examples of some hubs. Here's a hub on top of this panel here. This is like one of those Myers type of hubs right here. You can see it. I think there's a couple of them in here that go into the top because this is outdoors. And again, you run the risk of moisture getting in. So that's all part of their listing. Okay, but it's also listed for grounding and bonding use as well. And not all of them are. So most all of them are probably going to be listed for grounding and bonding use, but not all of them are listed for use in these specific locations. So just be careful what you're buying and make sure you check the listing on it before you use it in an application. Let's see here. And also, and we read it, it's talking about things that are made up tight. So let me give you another example. Threaded couplings, threaded entries, and listed hubs and enclosures. Here you can't necessarily see it, but you see right down here, this is threaded entry. This is a piece of rigid, and this is a coupling. Okay, that coupling is threaded. So when we talk about B2, we're talking about this raceway gets bonded to this raceway through this coupling. Okay, that's the concept we're talking about. All right, the next one is 250.92B3. Now, this one deals with threadless couplings. Now, this is where a lot of people will get confused on this, and I did have a question that came up, and I'm not sure where they got the question from, but they asked me and they said, Paul, I understand the fittings, the threadless couplings, the threaded connectors, but when I see connector, I'm thinking that means that I can take that into the box, and then I have your threads on it, and I can use a standard lock nut, because when I buy it, it'll come with a lock nut. That's the mechanical component. It's still not allowed to use that connector at the box for service as the only means. So you can't use the standard lock nut that may come with it with those only means, okay? You're not talking about the Myers type of hubs, which is listed for use, and it's a totally different type of connection system. We're talking about a standard lock nut that may be used with a threadless connector. The whole concept of this one in B3 is really talking about this threadless bonds this raceway to this elbow to this raceway, and then there's a connector down here that bonds to this raceway. So all together, that's what we're talking about with B3. That has nothing to do with this connector going into this box down here and then putting a standard lock nut on it. No. You're going to have to do something more. Now, in the best possible world, you knock out all the knockouts, and then you can use a bonding lock nut and make your life so much easier, okay? So if you end up not doing that and you have concentric, eccentric, or you have some type of impairment, then you're going to need a bonding jumper, right? We discussed that. If you remove all of the knockouts, it's like a punched clean hole, then you can get away with some other allowances, and we're going to see those in a minute, that type of thing. But again, remember, standard lock nuts, okay, is, and a lock nut itself isn't evaluated under 514.B for grounding and bonding. The fitting may be, okay? So there is a big argument in the industry where somebody says, well, wait a minute, if I buy this fitting and it comes with a standard lock nut and I'm using it for a service, then isn't this evaluated to be used with that standard lock nut? Well, the problem is we can't get away from the statement that says you can't use standard lock nuts. So, and we specifically allow me to use regular lock nuts when it comes to dealing with feeder applications and branch circuit applications, right? And we have an exception when we're dealing with over 250 volts to ground if we have a certain type of fitting and we're not encountering any types of impairment, then we can use a standard lock nut with a fitting as long as it's listed. So it can get confusing, but when it says in 250.92B that you can't use a standard lock nut, you can't use a standard lock nut, okay? All right, so, but what it's talking about really is these things you see here. These are what it's talking about, okay? And then B4 is the last one that says other listed devices such as bonding type lock nuts, bushings, and bushings with bonding jumpers. Okay, you have a bunch of options here. And again, manufacturers come out with other type. Some of them, they come out with the wings, they open up because they forgot to put one in and things like that. So in this scenario these are all great. This right here is probably the money maker right here. This bonding lock nut. As long as I have no impairments at all, I throw this sucker on there and I am good to go. I don't have to do anything else. It just simply binds down on there. You drive the screw down, it bites into the cabinet or the enclosure or the box. You're done, right? You would not be able to use this with concentric or eccentric, however you like to say it, You would not use that with those because it would do nothing but serve to push out the other rings in the knockout. It would be pointless. It would serve no necessary ability to do anything positive here. It just would push them out. So you want to make sure that you're only doing this with a fully knocked out. And again, remove all the KOs if you want, or punch your own hole if you're worried about it, and use one of these right here. Okay, screw it on and then drive that screw home. Also, here is a bonding bushing with a lay-in lug. Okay, and it's nifty to know it's got the nice rounded here. So we got our requirements. If there are insulated conductors for 4 and larger, then we're going to have what? Have to have a fitting on it. All right, so this one looks like it will cover that requirement if you have that situation that you run into. But there is the lay-in lug that would allow you to put this on, drive this home, and then you can put a bonding jumper on this if you wish. So I could use this. Let's say I had an impairment and I put a lock nut on it for the mechanical aspect of it, right? And then I put this on here, drive this home, and then put a bonding jumper on it because of my impairments. Then I'm not using a standard lock nut for the bonding. I'm using it for the mechanical part. That'd be okay, that type of thing. And of course, you have this here if I screw up. Okay, if I'm goof or something happens and I forget to put it on, then you can slide this around the conductors. Right here, you can put a lug on it. You can put a bonding jumper onto this to get you a supply side bonding jumper to be able to do that. If you are using this and you have an impairment, then you could utilize something like this called a bonding ring, bonding wedge, goof ring, however you want to call it. Okay. All right. So hopefully, I've explained most of these things to you. They're very basic, but really key things I want you to take away is, number one, you can never use standard lock nuts for service applications. The standard lock nuts, not specialty lock nuts that may come with something like Myers hubs or those type of hubs that are specifically listed for a certain application. We're talking standard lock nuts, and that's why it basically says standard lock nuts or standard bushings, that type of thing that aren't going to be utilized, right? So you got to do something extra, and I think that's important to remember. But just remember, you got to do a little something extra when it comes to service bonding to make sure you get it right. Hopefully you got something out of today's video. Hopefully I answered the questions you folks had on that. And then, of course, in an upcoming video, we'll talk about the over 250 volt to ground application. And you'll see that it's very similar. You don't get to connect to the neutral, okay, to bond anything on a, in that scenario, but you get to follow a lot of the other allowances that you do that we just went through in B2, B3, and B4, those type of things, okay? All right, folks, we will catch you on an upcoming episode. Till next time, stay safe. God bless.